Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write great fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, coming to you from the exciting world of Fresno, California. And I am the author of Wounds and a whole bunch of nonfiction books as well. And then most recently, a novella called The Girl, which should be out in May, first part of May. Part of the Harbinger series, and that's book 4. So that's my contribution.
The heavily anticipated, or highly anticipated novella coming from you. This is not your first novella, is it?
No, it's not. I wrote one a long time ago called Plotline, which is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, just as ebook. I don't have that one out in print. But I wrote that one a long time ago. And it's been one of the better sellers. For some reason, people really like it. And it's one of the wacky ones. So, yeah, that's, in fact, it's also, I think, the first book I self-published. The story behind it was I was contacted by a publisher in the Netherlands who, I was big in the Netherlands for a while. Yeah. Nowhere else, just the Netherlands. And why that is, I don't know. But nonetheless, I was big in the Netherlands for a while. I was contacted and asked to write a novella, which I did. And so I just did it in English. And the beautiful thing is I didn't worry as much about punctuation and spelling because it was going to be translated into Dutch anyway. So that came out. It did well. It hit their bestseller list for that particular series of books. And then, of course, it quickly died out after that. So it was fun.
Yeah, fun. Novellas are fun. They're a little bit quicker, a little faster turnaround time on those, and I think in a lot of ways they've got kind of the appeal of a novel. You've got the nice long story, but also the appeal of a short story and the fact that it's kind of comes in quick and it hits you hard and then leaves you wanting more. So there's a lot to like about novellas. I'm kind of wish there were more novellas available actually, but I think it wasn't. Novellas weren't really feasible for traditional publishing. They weren't like big money makers, so to speak. So maybe that's why they died out. I don't know.
Well, they were big for a while. It's hard to get the unit cost to work out. What you have to pay as a publisher, what you have to pay the writer, what it takes to produce it, the unit cost, then what you have to sell it for. And it's a smaller book, therefore it's hard to charge full amount. You don't want to charge $14, $15, $20, whatever, for something that's maybe 25% of a novel. So getting the numbers to work out, they most often appear around holidays. There's a bunch of Christmas novellas and those sorts of things, especially in religious markets, whatever the religious holidays are, sometimes you'll start seeing those. So on the Christian side of things, sometimes there's Easter novellas and other things like that. But it is a difficult thing. Originally they would just be published in series, like a serial, in the newspapers or magazines. Now, if you try to get them bound and stuff, it's a little more difficult and costly. So, yeah, it's different. And for me, it's difficult to write that short. In fact, the Harbinger book, The Girl, that I did is longer than any of the others, and I don't know how to get it down to paraphrase a different thing, it says the heart wants what the heart wants. Well, the story wants what the story wants.
Mm-hmm.
So it ran long, but.
Well, speaking of publishers, what's our publishing term for the day?
Well, there are 3 that make up just one topic, and that is the basic sizes of books. In the industry, they use certain terms. Now, most of us are familiar with the hardback, the hardbound book. That you used to get at Barnes & Noble and other places like that, or you can order online. We're familiar with those. Those come in various sizes also. But, of course, the key feature is that they have a hard front and back to them. Then there's a thing called a mass market book, or sometimes called a paperback, and those used to be they called them dime store books and stuff like that initially. They're much smaller, much thinner, meant to be very quick reads. Such as this, if I can get this, you see it's a small paperback, the kind of thing you could put in your pocket. with that. And then the one in the middle became very popular a decade or so ago, and it's still going great guns, and it's called a trade paper, and that's the one that might be new to folks. Trade paper is a larger paperback, so it's got a paper cover, but it's going to probably be a better cover. It's going to be a slick cover, and it's a size not quite as large as most hardbound books, but it's larger than the paperback book. So they're called trade papers, trade paper books.
Interesting. Fun stuff. And so the sizes here, you're not referring to word count, obviously. You're talking about the physical, like, dimensions of the actual book itself.
Yeah, that's right. The finished size of the book. And there's really another one. It's called YA. That's the shorthand for young adult. And that's because most young adult books would be a little too large for your typical paperback book, but not quite big enough for trade paper. And there's just decisions they make. And here's a little behind-the-scenes thing, a little peek behind the curtain. One of the things that dictates these is how much can we charge for the book, what bookstores are they going in, and what do their shelves look like. So something that happened to me once, I was asked to write a book, which is fine, and it was going to be standard-length novel, but they said, we're going to put it out in a YA size, so it's a little larger than a paperback. Initially, they said we're going to do it as mass market. Well, none of the bookstores that my book sold in could handle mass market. They were all set up for trade paper. And so they moved it up to the YA size, which is a little larger. But it was interesting, the thing that dictated the size was all the bookstores that they were going to sell to just wasn't set up, well, they weren't set up for paperback books.
It's very interesting. The shelf space is, prime realty, at Barnes and Noble, and a lot of decisions are made based on shelving units. You think it would be the other way around, but sometimes the industry kind of takes those turns, and you get those kind of interesting facts. That you don't think that the shelf at Barnes and Noble is going to dictate to the publishers what size they're going to print at. But long story short, publishers want to make money, and so they need their books to be a particular size, and they've crunched all the numbers to find out what's going to be the most profitable for them. So that's why those decisions are made.
The bigger stores, the bigger brick stores, can handle all the sizes, including picture books, coffee table books, that sort of thing. But the smaller ones, the independent bookstores, not so much. They have limited floor space, they have limited shelves, and they can't have a variety of shelves. It's just too expensive to stock them with the different sizes. So, yeah, it's one of the behind-the-scenes things. The good news is, and I'm being sarcastic here, that we as an author get to decide what size our book is going to be. All right, I'm lying to you. We have absolutely no control over any of that. So it is what it's going to be, what they decide is best, and you are certainly free to complain about it. And that's pretty much it.
I mean, there's a lot of things that publishers decide that we don't really get a lot of input into, and it depends on the publisher. With Lighthouse, I had a lot of input as to the final cover selection, and they took notes on when they gave me the initial design. I sent them back some notes and said what I thought should be changed, and those changes got made very rapidly. And so it was really nice working with a smaller publisher. I got to choose my title that I wanted, but sometimes with a bigger publisher, they're going to choose your cover for you. They're going to choose your title for you, and like it or not, I mean, they're publishing it, so sometimes they make those calls, and you kind of have to. You don't get a lot of say in it sometimes.
Yeah, you sign over quite a bit of rights to them. A good publisher will listen. They may have a reason not to follow through, but if you're working with a good publisher, they'll at least talk to you about it. I did a book called Prodigy. It came out as The Prodigy. They wanted to change the title, and I said, what do you want to change it to? They said, well, it's Prodigy now. We want to change it to The Prodigy. Well, sure, I don't have any problem with definite articles. Go ahead. But the cover was a child's face in profile, and that was it. And it just said The Prodigy. And it looked to me like a book on how to rear children. So I asked them to put something a little spookier to it and add the phrase, a novel, and so people would know. And they were glad to do that. So sometimes it works out well.
Yeah. on the bargain, if you look at the train, it looks like kind of an old Western train, which is not the trains that I describe in my book. But I kind of let it slide because I like the feel of it, and it had a nice kind of a ethereal quality to it.
Right.
So, I thought it was good. So, well, our topic today, by special request, I might add, is our favorite novels, and I've thrown in here not only why are they our favorite novels, but as writers, what is one thing that we appreciate that these novels have done. So I'll go ahead and jump in here, and I'm going to begin with it's a standard novel. It's one I teach to my AP students, but Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. If you've known me very long, you know I'm a Vonnegut fan, and Slaughterhouse-Five was the first one I read by him, and it kind of blew me away reading the first chapter where Kurt Vonnegut speaks directly to the reader. He breaks the fourth wall, no apologies, just he kind of pulls the curtain back and says, yeah, I worked on this novel for years and could never finish it, and here's why. And there's a sort of intimacy that you get in that first chapter that you don't get in most novels, because in most novels the author is supposed to be invisible. I've said that before on the show. I've written articles about it. We want to be, as writers, we want to be invisible. We want the reader to forget that they're reading and experience something. But the way that Vonnegut pulls this off is you continue reading because you care about what he has to say, and he almost becomes a character in the novel. In some of his other novels, he is a character, and so there's this layer of metafiction which I found really intriguing, not only because it kind of broke the rules, but because it was done well, it was done effectively. And that's really, that's the book that launched his career, that really made him famous, and it was because his readers felt that intimacy between him as a writer and them as his readership. And so I could go on and on about the things that I loved about this novel, but that was probably, for me, it was the most unique thing and the thing that sticks with me the most, aside from just the poignancy of it and the beautiful language, and there's just the sarcasm and the irony, the satire of it. It's funny, but there's a quiet hope in the novel, I think, that a lot of people miss. And that it was just something that really resonated with me. So that's probably my number one.
Do you know what year that came out?
I want to say, let's see, it was during the Vietnam War. It was the 60s. I want to say it was like 69, I think, 1969. I could check for you real quick.
Yeah, it could be. It could be around there. I was just wondering if that had a bearing on why the rule breaking was going to be allowed. And sometimes rule breaking is the way to go, but you have to be good. You have to be good at what you're doing. It has to make sense. It still has to be captivating. You still have to pull your reader all the way through. And I bring that up because my number one is Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke. When I really got into reading, it was science fiction that drew me in. And Rendezvous with Rama just rang my bell. I've read it several times, and there are two other books that came after it on the same topic. But the basic storyline is a huge metal cylinder appears in orbit around Earth, and so we send up a rocket ship to see what's going on, and astronauts make their way inside, and then what they see is an entire world. They don't see any people, any critters. But they see an entirely automated world, and it is really an adventure in space. And Arthur C. Clarke does a good job talking about centrifugal gravity, but also the other things they could do, how far they could jump, and when you climb up towards the center up a ladder, then you become a little more buoyant. You have less gravity than you do at the edges, and so it was a good thing there. But what Arthur C. Clarke does, he breaks a lot of the rules. He just over-narrates. You can go, I don't know how many pages and not see a bit of dialogue before you get into it. But here's the thing. He breaks the real rules, and he does it so well that it really doesn't matter. It's one of those cases where the rules are at best a suggestion for him. And the book would probably be less effective if he had followed everything I teach my students to do. I probably would have ruined his career, but that's the way he does. He over narrates and stuff. But the imagery, the science behind it, the adventure in going someplace you haven't been before, you have no idea what you're looking at. You're trying to figure this out. There's dangers involved. It turned out to be really, really a good read, and that has remained probably my favorite book for a very long time.
I agree with you. We've said before that you've got to know the rules before you break them, and when you see an author that's breaking the rules, you understand that they know the rules. They understand that they shouldn't break them, but they also know when to break them and how that's going to have kind of a good impact on it. On a related note, here's another one of my favorites. It didn't make my top 5, but I'm throwing it in here. I'm going to match your sci-fi novel with one of my favorite sci-fi novels, and it's a very popular one. It's Ender's Game, and Orson Scott Card, right?
Yeah, Orson Scott Card.
Yeah,
and he's a good mentor for you. He knows what he's doing. He's so good it ticks me off.
Right? It's a little bit annoying. What's interesting is in that he breaks a rule that he says never to break, and that's the kind of the white room conversation where you have two people speaking and you don't give any other information about who's speaking or where they are, etc. And that's how the novel opens, and he says never open with a white room conversation, and that's exactly what he does. But again, it goes back to this idea of why. He knew the impact it was going to have on the reader. He wanted to focus on Ender, not on the people talking about Ender. And that's our introduction to the character. The character's not even on scene when we're introduced to him. And so when we finally do see him, we know that there are wheels in motion, that he is already a pawn in a much larger game, and it's really interesting to watch him not only navigate the game, but take it over and make his own rules. That's a really fascinating read. The science behind it is very solid. And Orson Scott Card he deals with some really heavy philosophical issues. You're talking about shooting aliens, and you think that this is going to be it can't be that deep, but it is. There's a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot of philosophical reasoning and rationales behind there that can kind of keep you going back to the novel for more. And it's one of those that the more you read it, the more you get out of it. So very, very good book.
Yeah, and it led to quite a series. He did a short story. It's really kind of a long story, though I don't know if it's novella length or not. I can't remember now. About a society where it was illegal to put anyone to death. There was no such thing as capital punishment. So what they do is they would get you right to the edge of death. They'd boil you alive and stuff like that until you're about to die, and then snap you out of it, bring you back, and they just keep doing that over and over again, as if that were better than execution, I suppose. But for some reason, that thing really stuck with me because it was really a bizarre mind. Yeah, Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game. Great choice. Great choice.
Yeah. What's your next book?
I think I would go with one I read not long ago, and that was Stephen King's 11/22/63.
I've not yet read it, but I'm looking forward to reading it.
He has some great technique in it, and what he does is it's first person, and it's a time travel thing where a guy goes back in the past to keep Kennedy from being assassinated. Now, that's not a spoiler alert. I mean, that's on the back cover. So, but to make it interesting, of course, you have to change that. And he makes it far more costly for the guy who's trying to save Kennedy's life, and he has to spend... he can't go back to that time. He goes back to, I forget what it is, 10 years before. That's the only time he can get to, so he has to wait. He has to live a life back there, because once you return to your own time, it all starts over again. It resets. But he had some great phrases. Time is redolent. I'm not what you would call a crying man. And these things come back throughout the book, and it's a very, very large book. In fact, I have it here. Now, it's not always a pleasant book, but it was nonetheless... here we go. There we go. Yeah. Make you sick as you look at this. It was not always pleasant, a little tough at times to get through, but it is well executed. It had some real interesting approaches to keep the book from being like any other time travel book. So I thought it was very creative.
It's always tough to go back to that well and try and spin it in a new and exciting way. One of my favorite Stephen King's was Misery. Just the how well he developed those characters, and you've got what, 2 characters throughout the entire novel, for the majority of it, this guy is locked in a room, and so the setting, he's really limited in what he can do, and yet he puts together this novel with rich language and description and detail that just keeps you, fascinating characters. You just want to keep reading and reading. Really well done, Misery, and I've got 11/22/63 on my wish list. That's going to be coming after my Cormac McCarthy kick, which, by the way, serves as a fantastic transition to one of my other favorite novels, which is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It's a post-apocalyptic novel. There was a movie made of it. Maybe you've seen it. But what's really interesting about it is it's not just a post-apocalyptic novel. As a matter of fact, you never find out what happened. You never know why they're in this state of chaos and disarray, and what this huge world-ending catastrophe was, or anything like that. All you know is that there is a father and there's a son, and they live in a cold climate, and if they don't get to a warmer climate, they're going to freeze to death. And so they embark on this journey down this road, amazingly enough, the father and the son, the father trying desperately to keep his son alive, to keep his son safe from all the dangers that they're presented with, interacting with these new characters. Can you trust them? Can you not trust them? These people have become cannibals, a lot of them, and there's gangs running around, and it's almost I hate to say that it's a literary twist on kind of a Mad Max kind of a setup, except you don't have the desert setting, you have kind of a mountainous setting, and the relationship, what really made that for me is the characters, the relationship between the father and son, and I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, man. But to see the lengths the father goes to protect his son, trying to encourage him and give him hope when he is wrestling with the fact that there really isn't a whole lot of hope. So it's a pretty heavy book. It's not the feel-good, book of the year, but it is one that's going to sit with you. And the language, of course, Cormac McCarthy is one of the greats, and his reputation is well earned because his prose is just so well executed on pretty much every level. He's a minimalist when he needs to be a minimalist, but he can also pull out that sensory detail like an F. Scott Fitzgerald and go on at these great links of metaphors and similes that are very natural, very easy, and very powerful all at the same time.
That's great. I know sometimes I come across somebody who writes very, very well, and it depresses me. And I slow down my reading, and I begin to use it as a teaching aid, and start remembering some of the ways the person handled things. There is a great joy in reading something so well written, and then if you're a writer, there's also a great sadness in realizing that maybe you don't quite measure up, at least on this with this one guy.
Right.
There's always somebody better than you at it, and there's been a few books where I've done that. I've got into it, and I thought, man, I'm just going to give this up. So I tell the story about Dean Koontz because he was sort of my mentor. I don't mean literally, but I mean I would study his stuff, and I thought I'll never be this good. I got depressed, and I said, this guy's just too good. Can't remember what book I was reading, and then I went down to the bookstore and looked up his earliest possible books. The earliest ones had the earliest copyright dates on it, and I found a couple of those. They were just mass paperback, and this is when he was writing, 15 books a year or something, trying to make a living, writing under pseudonym. At the time, they were horrible. They were horrible, and I was so happy because what it said to me was, he wasn't born this good. He became this good. So there's still hope for me.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, as a musician, I felt that way when I would go and see concerts and see, the great guitar players and just go, why am I trying? Why do I practice at all? Because I will never be that. And as a writer, it's kind of the same way, though. I will say that when I read someone like Cormac McCarthy, like you say, you slow down, you read it, and all of a sudden it's a study in the craft. But I always find it encouraging. Find it encouraging that no matter how good I think I am, I can always be better. I become thirsty. With music, I wanted to give up, but with writing, I find that it actually ignites my passion, and it makes me want to challenge myself and do better. And so, for me, those are the good books. The bad books are when when the books are just not good. That's when I start thinking, just writing is just awful. So I have kind of that opposite effect there. But what's next on your list, Pops?
Well, speaking of Dean Koontz, notice that transition there, that little segue there. When I first began writing, and I tried to pick a few people who'd be my mentors, and by that I mean I would study what they wrote. And if there's something I didn't like, I had to give a reason why I didn't like it. If they did something well, then I had to study it and find out why it worked. And Dean Koontz was one of those. I'm especially enamored with his middle years. His real early stuff I didn't like as much, but then again, he was really cranking them out. His wife, I think, was going to support him for 5 years, and he had to make it in 5 years, so he was really working. I think he did something like 20 or 21 pseudonyms or something. But then when he began to hit it, he just got better and better. And even though I don't always like the subjects he writes about, he is an excellent, excellent craftsman. And so I always learn something when I read his stuff. And one of my favorites of his is an older book called Phantoms. It was later made into an okay movie. But Phantoms takes place in a mountain community. And it taught me two things when I was reading that. Scene setting, how to build tension, how to get the horror element involved. But he also had a storyline in there that wasn't needed. And I remember when I got to the end of the book, I thought, if he cut that whole thing out, he would still have a decent-sized book, and I think it would have read better. So it also showed me that no one's going to like your work 100% of the time. And it's certainly not going to be 100% of the people. But I could go to that book, and I learned a lot. Even though I didn't quite like the way he did that, I didn't really care. It was just I thought I probably wouldn't do it that way, and that was the learning experience for me. So Phantoms, nobody writes about rain like Dean Koontz. That's been my line for him for a long time. If you need rain, you got to read Dean Koontz. He can describe rain better than anyone, and he uses weather a lot. He had some others that I really enjoyed. Soul Survivor was very good, especially the opening page where a guy wakes up in his closet. He has no idea how he got there. All he knows is he's scared to death. And then one of my other favorites, and this one's called perhaps his most spiritual book. Don't mistake that for like a Christian message or a sermon. It's not that at all. But it had a little more spiritual element to it, called Taken, and that was good. But I think I'd list Phantoms as one of my favorites.
Excellent. Yeah, I've read quite a few of his. I enjoyed the Odd Thomas, the original Odd Thomas. I enjoyed that book. There was some neat stuff there, interesting premise and stuff. So I would say for me, Dean Koontz is a master of the pacing, the thriller of knowing when to speed up and slow down, and which is something we've talked about here before and may do a podcast on a little bit later. But he seems to, for me, that's what he's really excels at, is knowing when the story needs to go quicker and when you need to slow it down, and he does a pretty good job of that. For me, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say he's one of those rare people who edits as he goes. He will write page 1 several times until it's perfect. Then he'll start page 2. And he'll do the same thing for page 2. He'll write it 3 or 4 or 5 times. And when it's finally just right and dovetails with page 1, then he'll start page 3. Now, I'd be in the loony bin in no time. I'm not wired that way. But it works for him. And so when he's done, when he writes the last page, he's done. He's done all the editing along the line. So it's kind of an interesting backstory to Dean Koontz.
That would be depressing to me, because I would write my first page and then I would go back and edit it, and there would be only a paragraph left, and I would be sad. It's like, man, I thought I did more work than this. Oh man, my next one, kind of a tie here. The Violent Bear Away and Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. I am a huge fan of hers, and it's because I think I know
It's her
what there
birthday.
is to. It's her birthday today?
This is her birthday today.
How did I not know that? I need to get a cake. We will put candles on it.
The only reason I know this is, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but the only reason I know this is Garrison Keillor puts out a daily email. It's like this day in history, but it's for writers and poets. And
Nice.
so this day, Flannery O'Connor was born, and then you get a little bio of her. For example, she grew up on a farm and had chickens that could walk backwards, and they did some filming of that. And that was her big claim to fame initially as a young person.
Oh yeah.
And Flannery's her middle name. I forget what her first name is now, but you mentioned her, and I got thinking, I think this is her birthday. I'm sorry, carry on.
Oh, you're gonna have to tell me how to get on that email list because that sounds fantastic. But yeah, she raised peacocks and peahens and did all that. I was fascinated by them, and that's was one of the formative moments in her life as a writer. Is these chickens that walked backward and kind of her fascination with the grotesque and the macabre and the bizarre. I feel like I'm a pretty intelligent man, and when I read a book, I feel like I get it pretty well, and then I'll read it 2 or 3 or 4 times and go, oh wow, there's stuff that I missed. I could read Wise Blood and The Violent Bear Away probably about 18 more times and still not get it. She's just way too smart for me. I know that there's a lot more that I'm missing, and it's such a joy to go back to and kind of to go back to that well and start pulling more out, and seeing how she crafts things and puts things together. And her first sentence for The Violent Bear Away is like a page and a half long, and you never get lost. And you've got a dead man at a breakfast table and somebody else too drunk to dig him a grave, and I mean, just immediately everything is just hitting on all cylinders, and her characters are rich and vivid and believable, and the way she structures her stories so that each character has a moment of grace, whether or not they accept it, and her endings. You've heard me talk. If you've listened before, you've heard me talk about the unexpected but inevitable ending, and there's nobody who does it better than Flannery O'Connor. And if you want to know how to write an ending that's going to transcend space and time and enrapture readers for years to come, just study her works, her short stories, her novels. The endings just really make everything else worthwhile. It's a joy to get through, but then the ending just makes it even that much sweeter. So I can't say enough about her. She's one of the ones that I really try and pull apart and model my writing after, for sure.
What you want to do is go to look up Writer's Almanac. It's a free daily newsletter. Writer's Almanac. Garrison Keillor. Funny guy.
All right,
Yeah,
I'll do that.
I was just thinking that about some of the really good writers. I find that most writers, if they're reading someone and that someone is an excellent writer, we tend to walk away a little depressed because we realize we haven't arrived. Like you, I like to think I'm a pretty smart guy. I've got these degrees and I've done all these books and stuff. And I was doing a project with a guy who's an attorney, and he'd argued before the Supreme Court twice. And we were 5 minutes into this meeting, and I'm thinking, I don't think I'm the smartest guy in the room. I don't think I'm the third smartest guy in the room. I think maybe I ought to sneak out the back door is what I ought to do, because I am no way on the same level as this guy. And so that was an eye-opener, and it was a good slap down, a chance to get my feet back on the ground.
Yeah, we can get, but it's good to have those people around, because if we become complacent with our writing, if we don't have somebody to challenge us, if we don't have those books to kind of smack us back down and say, you think you're good, but you're not quite Flannery O'Connor yet. You think you're good, you're still not Cormac McCarthy. Keep at it. Roll those sleeves up. Get to work. It's good to have those. It's good to have those. I think it's good to have 2 or 3 novels in your stable that you just continually go back to. And I'm going to say something that may offend a lot of people. I genuinely believe you should be writing in your books It's like a love note to the author. Plus, it tracks your thoughts as you go through it. Things that you've noticed the first time or the second time or the third time. And I'm still going through Slaughterhouse-Five. I've probably read it 20 plus times and still finding stuff. Teaching it to my students, and I'll notice, how did I miss this before? It's right there. How did I miss that? It's a joy. I mean, it's a real pleasure. Yeah, it keeps us going too. Whose turn is it? I can't remember.
I think it's back to me.
I think it is.
And I'm going to go with something a little bit lighter than what we've been talking about, and this is an old book from 1929. It's an Agatha Christie book, and it's called Partners in Crime. And the reason I liked it, my wife loved it. She's the one that introduced me to it. As Tommy and Tuppence, and they live in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So we're moving from flappers, that type of thing, in England, and they're just they're a crack up as a couple. Now I don't know if they're on Netflix or not. You can look up Partners in Crime. They did a series. There's really several books. The beauty of it is, Agatha Christie, of course, a great writer, but the characters she created were realistic. The Tuppence is intuitive, upbeat, optimistic, wants to get out there and get everything done. Her husband, Tommy, is a little slower and is described as perhaps not being the brightest guy, but he has an eye for the facts. And so he's very difficult to fool, but he's not the brightest crayon in the box. So it's just fun, and it's a small book, and they're give and take with each other. If you can get into the milieu of 1929, it's just a lot of fun. So, and again, you can get it on Netflix, and they're just fun to watch. And I know many of the people who watch us either live or recorded are women. You got to see the hats she wears. It just
that's a good reason to watch a film. I think is to see the hats, the costuming.
Sure. You can put up with a lot at the BBC just to see those hats.
Yeah.
It's like Fitzgerald's books, which are in the 1920s, dealing with the flappers and the Lost Generation. You get to see a period of time, short-lived in history, yet still very impactful. It's just a bad way to start a sentence, but anyway, impactful on the history of the United States that continues to linger. Well, Partners in Crime, pretty much the same thing.
Fitzgerald actually, the flapper thing came from Fitzgerald's books. I don't know if you realize that or not, but the popularization of that particular fashion style came from Fitzgerald's writings. Interesting story there, which we can talk about a little bit later. But speaking of F. Scott Fitzgerald, my next book is not The Great Gatsby, nor is it by F. Scott Fitzgerald. That was the worst transition known to mankind, but there it is. I'm going with the Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin. I read it.
Well, yeah, I can see the connection there.
It's pretty much the same thing. I mean, the Great Gatsby is about trying to find peace and love and connectedness, and Game of Thrones is about blood and guts and gore. No, it's actually about a lot more.
They both use words.
They both have words.
There you go.
Every one of the words, by the way, has been published in another book.
The Dictionary.
All right. So, but yeah, I read Game of Thrones somewhat reluctantly because I'd heard, it has a reputation for subject matter that's questionable subject matter. It's very violent, a lot of gore, also a lot of adult encounters, shall we say. But I'd heard from some fairly conservative friends that whose opinions I trusted. They said, yeah, it's got some stuff in it, but it's worth the read. And I'm really glad that I embarked on the journey. This is another book. There are really two books that come to mind, kind of contemporary popular books that come to mind that when I got to the end, I was sold on the series. And the first was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, where I got to the end and I thought, oh, this woman knows what she's doing. I need to read the rest of the series because I trust her now. And the next one was George R. Martin. I got to the end of the first book of this Song of Ice and Fire, and I said, I'm reading the rest of the series. The language in it, not the inappropriate language, but the appropriate language and the descriptions and the images that he crafts and the world that he creates, and how he makes a world without magic, but then there's a little bit of magic, and just how he balances everything and juggles multiple plot lines, but he's still interweaving them. It would take me a long time to really analyze that book to the extent that it could be analyzed, and it was just, again, the images just kind of resonated with me, and it was one of those where I was experiencing the book and I forgot that I was reading. Just a very enjoyable journey to read that book.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at time here and trying to figure out the next one to give you. I'm going to do this one just quickly, so maybe we can sneak a few others in here. And that's Robin Cook novel Coma. Now, he did a bunch of them, and later on he got a little questionable for me for his plotting. He would just have smart people do stupid things. It bugged me. But Coma, he was doing what Michael Crichton was doing, and that is tech horror, tech thriller kind of things. Could you call it science fiction? Well, yeah, there's science fiction aspects to it, but I don't know if you put it in the science fiction category or not. And Coma, which they went on to make a movie out of and stuff, I thought was fairly well executed for a first novel, and also written by a doctor, ophthalmologist. And there are several of his books I liked, but he also, I thought, just kind of rounded the bend, like maybe he was plotting too quickly or something, but some of the smart guys were doing really dumb things just to create tension, and that's always a mistake. Coma, I thought, worked out very well, and it got me into that medical thriller genre, which I like quite a bit, and even toyed with in a few of my books.
You know, I've looked for that book several times, but I can never find it. The only Robin Cook book that I can find that's close to it is Comma, and I don't think that's the same thing. I'm
Here I was getting ready to tell you how to find it, and you're just messing with me.
Yeah, I had to go for the easy one, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But
yeah.
I always thought it was a book about grammar, so apparently I was wrong. So also a good one, Coma. See, I can't even stop it now. I've got people ringing my doorbell. I'll tell you what, Pops, I'm going to go check my door, and I'm going to mute my microphone, and I'll let you talk about your next book.
Sounds great. Yeah, that's always fun. That's happened to me before. Was doing an interview, was doing a program like this, and I was a guest on it, and somebody started banging on my door. It turned out they'd kicked their ball in the back yard and wanted me to go get it. Kind of difficult to deal with. My next one is the Nero Wolfe books, written by Rex Stout. Rex Stout is an excellent writer, especially for this genre. But the great thing about the Nero Wolfe books is that the characters, the two main characters, Nero Wolfe, who is this extremely overweight, this obese detective who almost never leaves his home. He doesn't leave his brownstone. And the reason is he doesn't like to go outside. He doesn't like people. So everyone has to come to him. Even when the crime is solved, they have to come to him. And then his partner, Archie Goodwin. What Rex Stout did that intrigued me from the beginning is he kind of reverses roles. Nero Wolfe is the smart guy, but his partner, Archie Goodwin, is extremely smart too. But Nero Wolfe loves his beer. Archie Goodwin drinks milk. And you'd expect it to be the other way around because Archie Goodwin's the guy that's going to go knock down anyone who gives him any lip. Nero Wolfe isn't going to do that. That's Archie Goodwin's job. But his drink is always milk, where Nero Wolfe cares only about two things, orchids and beer, which he consumes in a tremendous amount. A lot of fun. Most of the reading is light. These two are constantly arguing, and it's just great entertainment. All the Nero Wolfe books are good, and there's a guy writing more contemporary ones too. For the life of me, I can't think of his name now, but the Rex Stout ones are where you want to begin anyway. Such as The League of Frightened Men, I think was the first one.
Those are a lot of fun. I guess I can't be too upset about the person ringing my doorbell and knocking on my door because they brought me an Amazon package. So that had been delivered to the wrong house. So I figure that's a good neighborly thing to do. I'll forgive them for interrupting the podcast for that.
Ooh. And it's
So
book size too.
it is book size, but unfortunately it's for my children and not for me. Sad days.
What?
Well, I guess it's good for them, but a little sadder for me. I do want to mention one more, and then Molly has a question for us to tackle as well. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien is one of my top favorite novels. I just absolutely love this. Some call it a novel, some call it a collection of short stories, but they are interconnected. And I would be lying if I said this didn't have an impact on an influence in the bargain, and how I wove those stories together, or at least tried to weave those stories together. The Things They Carried was pretty influential in that and inspiring me in that way, but I'd also again, just the way he deals with subject matters and the characters that he describes are so vivid and so real, and talking about war and the ramifications of war from a soldier's perspective. And it's not just your normal, I'm going to go out and save the world kind of soldier perspective. It's a very different kind of an attitude that these people have, and he's got some beautifully tragic images. If you've read the book and I say, the water buffalo, you immediately know what I'm talking about, and you get a little bit weepy. Just some super powerful situations and stories in there that that'll stick with you for a long, long time. My favorite was How to Tell a True War Story. Just an incredibly poignant, very, very succinct, but also kind of this sprawling tale. Very metafictional in a lot of ways as well, and you come to really care about these characters and them. And it's, if you want to learn how to describe a character fully in very few words, he's a great guy to study, because you get to know them through their dialogue and through their behavior, and how they interact with each other. You know these people, you know these men, you're serving in the platoon with them, you're right there with them as they're going through the different battles and all of that kind of stuff. Some pretty incredible stuff. So if you haven't read it, it's definitely one that I think should be on your to-read list.
That's great.
Yeah. That's about all the time. Let's talk. Molly's got a great question, and I'll kind of hand this off to you first. She says, aside from the list of your 5 favorite books, which books originally shaped your desire to become a writer? What book did you read that you first said to yourself, I want to do this, I want to be a writer? For her, it was the Little House series and The Wizard of Oz. Those would not be my answers. But what would you say, Pops? What would be...
I've been thinking about that since Molly posted it, and I'm not sure I have a clear answer. I do remember that I was a child. I was a voracious reader as a child, and about 3rd grade I was reading a series of books that had 2 brothers who would go off on adventures. They were fairly young, but they'd follow their fathers, sort of like Hardy Boys kind of thing, except they would go to Africa, they go to the Amazon, and all the sights there and the animals. That intrigued me, and of course in some early science fiction stuff like Journey to the Center of the Earth and the like. I remember reading those and enjoying them very much. And I think about that time I began to think that writing would be good. And then as I went through all my different careers, I'm a professional, used to be, so I used to be a campus cop, I used to work at McDonald's, I used to be a firefighter, I used to work in architecture, I did all these things, but there was always the desire to write. So even when I was in architecture, I was writing a screenplay. It was, on reflection, as I look back, it was pretty horrible, and lucky we didn't show it to anyone. But that's how you get the horrible out, so you can get to the good. It's cleaning out the stable, as it were. So that would be my answer. What about you?
I kind of the same story. I just read a lot of books and liked them. But I think for me, I was a an avid reader of comic books, especially in my teen years, something that you got me into, Pops, and I thank you to this day. But aside from my stories about dinosaurs living in the backyard when I was 7 or 8, writing those stories, the first real stories that I wrote and continue to write were my own superhero stories. And I knew I couldn't draw. I had absolutely no talent in that, but I thought I could create a cool comic book character. And so I would create these stories about comic characters, and I would write those. The one that I'm remembering right now is The Adventures of Happy Star. Do you remember those old Carl's Jr. commercials? The little Happy Star? And I just had him go off the deep end and start like shooting people and going crazy, and it was bizarre and it was funny, and that's why
people know why I have all this gray in my beard.
Yeah, because I make Happy Stars shoot people. So I just remember it was so much fun to write. I don't remember much about the plot except that it was bizarre, but it was fun, and I really challenged myself because I wanted these to be good, and I stuck with it. So I would say comic books had a pretty large influence there. Marvel, I'm a Marvel guy, so your Spider-Man's. I was a big reader of Spider-Man. There were some smaller comics that nobody else read except for me, but called Darkhawk and Sleepwalker, and some of these off-brand kind of comic books, Marvel comic heroes that you don't hear about anymore because nobody bought their books. And Image. So I was big into Spawn and some of those other comics published under the Image publishing. So yeah, I think comic books did that. And then as I started studying it in college, a lot of the short stories writers, your Raymond Carvers and your Flannery O'Connors and your Ernest Hemingways and F. Scott Fitzgeralds and all the greats. Started reading those, going, wow, like that's what this can be. Like there's so much that can be done, and just kind of forming my opinions of what I liked and what I didn't like. So I don't know that I could, other than comic books, I don't think I could point to a particular novel that really inspired me to do that. It's kind of always in me. So excellent. We are about out of time. Next week we're going to, since Easter's racing up on us real fast, we're going to talk about spirituality in fiction, not just Christian fiction, but how to explore the spiritual side of your characters, which is often something that most writers ignore. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Pops, how can people get in touch with you?
Still the best way to do that is altongansky.com, and from there you can bridge over to the Writers' Conference. You can see the self-published stuff. You can see the new stuff, the nonfiction. It's all there, and if it's not there, there are links to get you wherever it is that you want to go.
Excellent. And as always, you guys can find me at aarongansky.com. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. We just really appreciate you guys listening in. And until next week, good writing.